Everything's backward and upside down when you look in the thingy. All right, here we go. All right. Hey, folks. Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. It's Tuesday, November 6th, the day we've all been waiting for, the day of the midterms where we find out whether or not Donald Trump is going to get a green light or a red light for part 2 of his administration. So I did my part. I voted like a good Boulder liberal that I am. And I hope you had your voice heard as well. We want integral thinking to be represented in the polls. So it's fun actually to think about my friends who are all Boulder liberals as well, and to see how we're sort of dealing with this. This is, really the first time to actually have a real referendum on Trump, which is what this is. There's no question about it. And on one hand, we're all confident because the midterms always go against the president's party. It went against Obama, that's how it works. There's always a sort of a backlash after the first 2 years of an administration. We look and we see that the generic ballot is up 10% from with the Democrats over the Republicans. That is, people, registered voters, likely voters even, who say that they would rather vote for a Democrat than a Republican. That's 10% up, and that's good. And early voting's up, and there's some really good signs. Not the least of which is the fact that, when I think about the line in Boulder, it's like, isn't it obvious that Donald Trump isn't now, after 2 years, isn't fit to be president? And I saw this, I'll share it. Headline on CNN's website, and that is that Donald Trump didn't tell the truth 83 times in one day. And the copy reads, in the month of October, Trump said 1,104 things that were totally or partially untrue, more than double his next most prodigious month, which incidentally was September, in parentheses. And then they go on, as one example, on October 22nd, when he traveled to Houston to hold a rally for Texas Senator Ted Cruz, Trump said 83 untrue things in a single day. 83, exclamation point. So, that's gotta be enough, right? Except we have this dread that is sort of underlying all of it. And I feel it myself. I remember that, it was exactly 2 years ago tonight, election night 2016, and I was preparing for my Hillary Clinton victory party. And Terry Patton was here and Diane Hamilton was here, and we had a whole thing going. But it did not turn out that way. So, we'll know more tomorrow, but in the meantime, it's good practice. In terms of an integral practice, because things are just so juicy during this kind of a cultural event, an election like this, a big election like this. People are talking about the biggest election of our lifetime. You hear that a lot. This one definitely would be one of the biggest in my lifetime for sure. And it's been interesting to see how people deal with it. And I was just thinking about two of my friends who sort of represent a spectrum of my Boulder liberal friends. And they're both Trump haters. They're both women in their 60s. They're liberals through and through. And they both have, sort of a lot of attachment to politics too. They can get depressed, they can be up and down, they follow it, and yet they're taking divergent paths during this election. And so I was talking to friend number one the other night, and she was telling me how she was just beside herself and depressed. She said she actually had a hard time getting out of bed on the day she wasn't working. And this whole thing is really weighing on her, and all of these horrible things that this horrible man Trump is doing. And, when she is working, she has her headphones in and she's listening to lefty podcasts and Thom Hartmann and Randy Rhoads and the sort of lefty internet. And it's an example of, when I think of, how we can respond to things, one of the sort of models that we use is you could be attached, detached, or there's a third option called non-attached. So sort of explain, but this is an example of attached. There's a really hardened identity. There's a hermetically sealed worldview, in her case, a green, postmodern, liberal, political worldview that cannot let in, the sort of outside views, or is not aerated, becomes very, very contracted. And, contracted life force is basically suffering. It's some flavor of suffering. And so I see that. And then what was the segment I played a couple days ago? Actually, I'll play another 10 seconds or so of it. Hang on here. It's an example of detached. And this is young people at Riverside College at a bus stop being asked by an NBC reporter whether or not they are going to vote. And here's what they said. I'll show it.
Sorry, not to be annoying, but we're with NBC News, and I'm just trying to figure out, is anybody here going to vote in the election on November 6th? Anybody? Anybody? Nobody's going to vote?
Now that's detached. And, it's basically typical of people at that age. And as I talked about last week, I was there too when I was their age, even though I was a political science major in the middle of Watergate. I don't remember voting anyway. Hang on. There we go. Close that, close that. All right. All right, so there's our examples of attached and detached. But there's also non-attached. And this is, sort of the state or the posture that one wants to achieve in the meditative life, in the contemplative life, where you are both passionately engaged and willing to embrace reality and to do the best and trust yourself that you can handle whatever it is that happens, even if it kills you, or shall we say when it kills you. But today is a good day to die. It's that kind of a thing. So you are both, again, in the game, but fluid, willing to move with whatever's happening and not have a lot of friction with that. And that's an ideal state. And, we work with that even in terms of sitting and watching the breath and having breaths that we didn't like that much. But there they are, and we move on to the next one. But there's this other state that my friend Maria seems to have adopted, that I think is just perfect. It's a hybrid of the two, and she is basically tuned out. She hasn't paid attention to politics. She's deleted all of her news shows for the last 2 weeks. And she's on the internet. So if there's a headline that's sort of favorable, she'll look in on it. But she's just, she's, hang on, I need to turn on Do Not Disturb. I don't know how to do that. So she'll tune in when we're winning, is basically her watchword. And otherwise she tunes out. And as a result, she's happening pretty well. She's doing pretty good. And I think that was, I think it's good practice. And I think anytime that we can see what we're doing instead of just be doing it, then that's to the good. All right, so that's one thing I wanted to mention. And I thought this would actually be an episode that's a little bit just odds and ends. That's what I actually called it on my notes. But it turns out that, like with Integral, there's always something that is tying it together. And of course, by tomorrow at this time, we'll know more about Trump too, and we can talk about that in a future show. But what I wanted to point out now was it kind of gets to the bigger, point of politics. And that is, what kind of a society are we creating? And what kind of a culture and shared agreements? And even how do we share the wealth? And is that even a legitimate question? And, what kind of a system? And so we know as evolutionaries that things are always changing and there's a new something that is arising. And I felt that, I got to say, when I went to my mailbox and got the latest copy. This is actually a week old now, but when I got this copy of a magazine called The Week, and you can see the cover is The Politics of Fear with a pumpkin head of Trump. But I have to say that I really love this magazine, and that the magazine itself has an integral sensibility. And you can see even here with the cover story about Trump's nationalist campaign on the Caravan. And what they do in The Week, this is a British magazine, and this is the American edition. I think it's maybe 10 or 12 years old. But they come up with excerpts from various magazines or various newspapers that are either center left or center right. They don't go too far outside the 40-yard lines because this is a mainstream magazine. But even with that, you get this sort of, multi-perspectival view. And so here with the nationalist campaign on the Caravan, they talk about that. First of all, they do a little introduction where they just give you the facts. And it turns out that there are 7,000 Central American migrants in this caravan, or at least when this was written. I understand it's dwindled some since. And it began with 160 migrants setting out together from Honduras last month, their journey publicized by left-wing Honduran politician Bartolo Fuentes to bring attention to the gang violence and lack of jobs in the country. So I actually didn't know that with all of the, crazy coverage of this thing. I didn't know that basic fact. And the word spread on social media and one thing led to the other. And so here they are. So they show how New York Times, paragraph here, that New York Times is condemning Trump for dialing up demagoguery. Washington Times, which is a conservative paper out of Washington, D.C., says President Trump is giving voice to what many Americans are thinking as they watch news accounts of the advancing throng. From Slate magazine, it's anti-immigrant fear-mongering. And these are all explained. From the Washington Post, Megan McArdle. She says that this migration raises valid concerns. From David Frum in the Atlantic, and David Frum is the infamous axis of evil advisor to President Bush, although he's become far more of a moderate since. And here's his sort of never Trumper perspective, where he says, if liberals insist that only fascists will defend borders, then voters will hire fascists to do the jobs liberals will not do. And so, you go through and it has the columns from all over the country. But the thing I actually wanted to point out in the magazine is the first thing I look at when I open the mailbox. I often look at it on the way as I walk into the house. And that is a review of an interesting car, a new automobile. And I love cars as an aesthetic sort of experience. And I've always, even as a kid, I always categorized them, and I knew a lot of stuff about them. And it's not that I have a particularly fancy car. I have a little 3-year-old Leaf with 6,000 miles on it, which I love, by the way. But here they're reviewing the car that kind of turned me off, I got to say. And I don't always like them, but this one really even offended me in a way. And what it is the new 2019 Rolls-Royce Cullinan. And I'll show you a picture of it. All right, hang on. Okay, so here is the exterior of the Cullinan. It's Rolls-Royce's new SUV, from Rolls-Royce, an SUV. It's 6 feet tall. It's 3 ton, that means 6,000 pounds. It goes from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. That's Tesla territory. And it has a 563 horsepower turbocharged 12-cylinder engine. And here's what Car and Driver says about this Rolls-Royce. It is inherently silly, of course, to spend $325,000 for a vehicle that doesn't do anything a Toyota can't. Plenty of charities could use the money wasted. But step inside the new Cullinan and you instantly feel special. Yeah, so there's that. And let's show you the interior so you can see how commanding this 6 foot tall thing is out in the world. And here's from Automobile Magazine. From Auto Week. Rolls-Royce says its customers asked for an all-wheel drive SUV that would stand out in a crowd. And the Cullinan not only does that, but can easily drive over anything that gets in its way. Its front-end styling could scare children, but, and here's the kicker, who are we to judge? Buyers at this end of the stratosphere have their own motivations. And, I got to say that the green part of me just wants to sort of puke at that kind of ostentation. And, and that's developmental. At some point, see, what this is actually the red streak that still exists in orange, where it's like, look at me, look how successful I am. And when you get to green, that starts, even a mature orange, you start developing some taste around ostentation, which, speaking of which, is something that our president hasn't done. But so be it. It is part of the world. But there is actually a price that we pay for that. And so when I saw this Cullinan, which by the way, is named after the largest diamond that we have in captivity, I guess. That's what they named it after. But it made me think of an article that I had cut out from The Economist. It actually ran in June, so a couple months ago. And again, another great, I think, magazine with integral sensibility, also British with an American edition. The Economist, is basically a capitalist tool, but it has a green sensibility, I think, again, and an integral sensibility that it can hold both perspectives. And here they are reviewing a book that deals with this sort of Cullinan syndrome. And the book is called The Inner Level: How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. And the authors, Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, argue that when the distribution of income spreads apart, so there's inequality, a society begins to malfunction, affecting the mental health of everyone living within it. And they go on to say that, so the author's argument focuses on status anxiety, stress related to fears about an individual's place in the social hierarchy. Anxiety declines as income rises, but in more unequal countries, it is higher in the sense that it creates, here's what they say here. Now, anxiety contributes to a variety of mental health problems, including depression, narcissism, and schizophrenia, and manifestations such as mental illness, such as self-harm, drug and alcohol abuse, and problem gambling. And they talk about how that increases in more unequal countries, more unequal states, and more unequal neighborhoods. And I thought that was interesting. So they emphasize that a person's relative position rather than their absolute income is what matters most. So how we rank according to the other people in the system, in the family. They write, indeed, the social damage wrought by inequality might be severe enough that the rich and less equal societies would benefit from efforts to even things up. So it even affects people at the highest, in the highest ranks. They go on to write, the fact that relative status matters so much is a result of human beings' intrinsically social nature. And I like this. I like how we're beginning to have or maybe we're having at least a deeper understanding of that loosh, that liquid space that we all exist in with each other. And I'm talking about the whole culture, the whole planet, but, basically nation states here is what they're talking about. But they write, that across primates, they write, the size of the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for higher level cognitive functions, varies with the typical group size of a species. Living in complex social groups is hard cognitive work. Survival requires an understanding of roles within the social hierarchy and intuition of what others are thinking. Thus, people are necessarily sensitive to their status within groups and to social developments that threaten it. And I thought that was interesting. And I'm happy to see that we are developing a sensitivity to that, even in the Economist, even among the capitalists and the globalists. And that's definitely a globalist magazine. So way forward, I think, is to, when I was thinking about this morning, the song that has been rattling around in my head came up. It's an old Christian hymn that we used to sing in my little church. And the first line is this: blessed be the ties that bind our hearts in Christian love. The fellowship our spirit finds is like to that above. And, so that's what a tight-knit band of Christians would sing about each other. A church, the body of Christ would sing about each other. And from an integral perspective, we want to feel that way about everybody, at least in the country. I mean, there's increasing circles of identity that we have in the left-hand quadrants, in the social and cultural quadrants of reality. And so we want to, feel that with each other. And I actually looked up the lyrics. The third, I won't sing it for you. I won't subject you to that. But the third verse is also interesting in getting what I'm talking about. It goes, "We share our mutual woes, our mutual burdens we bear, and often for each other flows the sympathizing tear." It looks like tear, but it's tear, and so it's not an exact rhyme, but I thought it was, that idea of we share our mutual woes, our mutual burdens we bear, and we have a sympathizing tear for each other. And I do think, that, evolution shows that we have an ever greater circle of people that we consider worthy of moral consideration. And that's ever growing. The green becomes world-centric, modern is nation-centric, traditional is more my tribe, or it's not tribe, or it's more just, my clan, my people. And we want to have sort of an ability to feel into all of those. But I thought that was, I just wanted to say I'm happy to see that arising, that understanding. Do I have time to do this? Yeah, sure, why not? There's another item that caught my eye that I could share with you. And this is almost an antidote to status anxiety that comes from a different direction. And this is an exhibit that just opened in the new museum in New York. And it is a sort of a career retrospective of one of my favorite artists, Sarah Lucas, who I did a show on a while back called Postmodern Beauty, From Cirque to Seinfeld to Saatchi, which Cirque du Soleil, the Seinfeld show, and the Saatchi Museum. And the Saatchi Museum is where Sarah Lucas and a lot of her young British, I think it was in the 80s, this whole new wave of sort of punk British art came on the scene. And I'll show you Sarah here. She's so fabulous. There she is, Sarah Lucas Unmasked, From Perverse to Profound. Not widely known on this side of the Atlantic, the British sculptor has a show at the new museum this fall that may cause jaws to drop. And Sarah Lucas, and again, you can go to the podcast called Postmodern Beauty, where I show a lot of her art. But basically, it, like a lot of the artists in this particular movement of postmodernity, and postmodernity in general in a certain way, challenge us to say that this is beautiful and this isn't beautiful. It's like they challenge our whole idea of beauty. Hang on just a second. And they challenge our idea of status and who's better than anybody else. And that's, of course, what green does. It really wants to iron out the inequalities, and and sometimes in a pathological way, but it can also be done artistically. And I'm going to show one of her pieces that I saw at the Saatchi Museum that I think is just remarkable. It's called Au Naturel, and here it is. This is her sculpture called Au Naturel. And for those of you who are listening, it shows a mattress kind of bent up against a wall. And on one side of the mattress, there's two melons protruding and a bucket. And on the other side is two oranges and a cucumber. So you can kind of imagine that. And the mattress is not too pretty either. But just so you can conjure it up in your mind, here's what they wrote about it in the Saatchi Museum where I saw it, and I bought the book, and this is the write-up in the book. It's just, a paragraph. Au Naturel by Sarah Lucas. The empty shuck of an instantly recognizable image, the filthy mattress, the old tin bucket, droopy melons, the requisite 6 inches of cucumber protruding hungrily from an unsavory stain. Welcome to married life. A hollow shell of easy comfort and habitual relegation, fat with make-do satisfaction, and occasionally pondered dreams of what could have been. Domestic objects, uncanny and banal, stand in for a passion so thoroughly plowed that not a hint of intrigue is left. I love that. It stands in for a passion so thoroughly plowed, there's not a hint of intrigue left. Only the well-practiced compliance of tolerating each other's nose-picking and silent farts. So, again, one of my favorite works of art. And I'll tell you why. And it actually gets to this idea of status anxiety. When I saw this work and the whole museum of works like this that really challenge you to say, I dare you to say I'm not beautiful. Other paintings of women with overweight and their big spread legs, and men with realistic penises and they're 20 feet tall. And it's just crazy. Again, you can see it on that the podcast I did. But there's something so liberating about it. There's something that is sort of the dropping of these ideals of what beauty is in a way that, I think of, I did a podcast a few weeks ago with Tom Habib about the higher stages of couples love, it's called. But we were talking about these stages of couples love. And, the first stage is 2. And there's a stage that a lot of us are in for a long time, which is the stage that is marked by the belief that I married the wrong person and I'm with the wrong person. And that things curdle in a relationship like that. And we end up seeing it, not unlike this art, where we've gotten kind of fat, and it's kind of it's unsavory, and I'm debased by the whole thing. Until we realize that there's actually something that we can relax and that we're all in the same boat, that we can forgive ourselves, that we can drop our ideals, and that and we can just be who we are in a whole new way. And we can see that this kind of art, so this art was done, I believe, in 1994, if I'm not mistaken, that was in a way the beginning of redefining beauty in ways that we are seeing great benefits of today. That you don't, beauty is no longer the Susie Chapstick, the sort of blonde, blue-eyed, perfect little, Scandinavian girl kind of thing. And that's expanded to the point where different body styles and body types, it's a world that includes more of what of the different forms that human beings take. And it makes me think of, one of the great liberating acts of my life, which is when I went with a friend to a body electric workshop for gay men. And I really didn't know what was going to happen at this retreat. I was probably 28 or 29 years old. And we went to this big house outside of Santa Fe, and there were like 35 men of all ages, all shapes, all sizes. And within the first 15 minutes, we were given the instruction, okay, everybody, stand up now, take off your clothes. It was like, what? Oh my God. And I had all kinds of body issues, you know, and shame and, you know, all kinds of things. And I did, you know, what are you going to do? And so did everybody else. And for the next 4 days, we did all of these exercises, sort of soft core exercises. It was, you know, if a trap door would have opened, I would have gone happily descended through it and not knowing where I was going to land. But there I was, and I had to do it. And I have to say that at the end of that, the humanity kind of experience, I had lost, I don't know, 90% of my body issues in a way that I am so grateful for, And so there is something to that, you know, to just getting real, that allows us to drop a lot of the status anxiety that we see. And yet there's still, you know, in terms of the economics, there's still a ways to go. So anyway, I think I'll stop there, and we'll see what happens in the next 24 hours with this election, and we'll check in on that next time. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Daily Evolver. Bye.